The Luons, a diminutive species of rodent-like beings, were once held in high esteem throughout the galaxy. Their intellectual prowess was unparalleled, and their advancements in science and technology were vital to the flourishing of the Galactic Alliance. Though physically frail and unassuming, their contributions had earned them a place among the most respected races. While other species pursued conquest, the Luons dedicated themselves to the pursuit of knowledge, acting as the silent engineers behind significant breakthroughs in energy, medicine, and intergalactic communication. Then, the plague arrived. It began subtly, spreading across their homeworld, Lurix 5, like an unseen, silent predator. Initially, it seemed manageable. The Luons were no strangers to adversity, boasting some of the galaxy's finest medical expertise. However, it soon became apparent that this was no ordinary affliction. The virus propagated with unprecedented speed, sweeping from one city to another with terrifying velocity. Entire communities succumbed within days. For every attempt the Luons made to contain it, the virus appeared to mutate, growing more potent. Panic gripped Lurix 5. The streets, once teeming with scholars and scientists, were now filled with dread and despair. The Luran leadership, usually composed and decisive, found themselves in a desperate state. They reached out to their allies within the Galactic Alliance, species they had supported for centuries by sharing their knowledge and wisdom. They implored them for assistance, medical supplies, quarantine facilities, anything to halt the advance of this catastrophe. The response was silence. Days bled into weeks, and the lack of response from their supposed allies became deafening. Finally, a reply arrived, but it was not the aid the Luons had desperately sought. The Galactic Council, the governing body of the Alliance, declared Lurix 5 under quarantine. No ships would be dispatched, no supplies would be provided. The Luons were to be left to fend for themselves, isolated to contain the threat. The decision was cold and pragmatic. The Luons, despite their past value, were now deemed expendable. Their intellectual contributions, however significant, could not outweigh the risk of the plague spreading beyond their planet. The Alliance, prioritizing its own survival, had classified the Luons as a liability, fearing the plague's potential to escape Lurix 5 and infect their own populations. Sacrificing the Luons was deemed the safer course of action. The betrayal was swift and absolute. No vessels departed neighboring star systems. No assistance materialized from their closest companions. Even the medical teams that had previously collaborated with the Luons retreated, severing all communication. The Luons were utterly alone. As days turned into weeks, Lurix 5 transformed into a charnel house. The once brilliant metropolises lay in ruins, consumed by sickness and death. Entire families vanished, their homes left abandoned, silent testaments to the devastation. Those who survived huddled in underground shelters, praying for a miracle, yet knowing deep down that none would come. The skies remained empty, devoid of any passing ships or beacons of hope. It was in this bleak moment, when all seemed lost, that the Luons' final desperate transmissions reached an unexpected audience, a group of human explorers. They were a small contingent, part of a fleet charting unexplored regions nearby. Their mission had no connection to Lurix 5, and the galaxy's major powers had long dismissed them as an insignificant species. However, these humans possessed a reputation for acting on instinct, for disregarding the political complexities that often paralyzed the larger races. Captain Arya Holt, leading the expedition, intercepted the distressed signal late one night while her crew was stationed in orbit around a distant moon. The transmission was faint, nearly obscured by interference and static, but the message was undeniably clear. The Luons were pleading for help. Holt, unlike the Galactic Council, did not perceive a risk in assisting a dying race. She saw an opportunity to do what was right. Despite the potential danger, despite the knowledge that aiding the Luons might incur consequences from the Alliance, she made her decision. "We're going to Lurix 5, she informed her crew. They offered no argument, no hesitation. The decision was unanimous. The small fleet altered its course, heading directly towards the plague-ravaged planet, prepared to defy the galaxy's indifference and stand by a species everyone else had forsaken. Humanity was en route. Captain Arya Holt stood on the bridge of her vessel, her gaze fixed on the data flowing across the console. The distress signal from Lurix 5, faint and almost lost in the cosmic background noise, carried a message that could not be ignored. The plague had decimated the Luran population, leaving them abandoned by the very alliance they had helped to forge. Holt had heard whispers of the Galactic Council's decision to isolate the Luons, but the raw desperation in their plea made it starkly real. Her crew observed her, awaiting orders. They were explorers, not physicians or soldiers, and their mandate did not extend to entanglement in the political machinations of the Galactic Alliance. Yet none of that mattered now. Holt understood they could not simply pass by, feigning ignorance of the message. "We're going in," she declared, breaking the silence. Her crew did not question her command. It was not merely a matter of defying orders. It was about adhering to a moral imperative. The Luons required assistance, and no one else was coming. As they neared Lurix 5, the extent of the devastation became chillingly apparent. The once vibrant cities were now dark and lifeless, the planet's surface scarred by the pandemic. Sensors detected scattered signs of life, but the population had been drastically reduced. The crew could feel the palpable weight of abandonment hanging over the planet. Upon landing, they were met by a small contingent of surviving Luons, frail and wary. They approached with trepidation, their diminutive forms trembling with exhaustion and fear. The crew witnessed the profound toll the plague had inflicted, their movements sluggish, their frames gaunt. These were beings on the brink of collapse. Captain Holt stepped forward, extending her hand in a universally recognized gesture of peace. "We're here to help," she stated, her voice soft yet firm. Initially, the Luons remained silent, their trust shattered by the betrayal of their allies. The appearance of new visitors sparked as much apprehension as it did hope. However, Holt's sincerity pierced through the tension. Slowly, a Luran elder extended his hand, his strength visibly waning, but the gesture was sufficient. A connection had been forged. The human crew immediately commenced their work. Medical supplies were distributed, provisions were shared, and makeshift quarantine zones were established to curb the spread of the plague. The risk of infection was considerable, but Holt and her team remained undeterred. Donning protective gear, they began treating the afflicted, fully aware that the plague had already claimed countless lives. Every conceivable precaution was taken, yet the danger loomed over them like a shadow. The Galactic Council's rebuke arrived swiftly, a transmission delivered within hours, blunt and devoid of compassion. The message was unequivocal: turn back, or face sanctions. The Council harbored no concern for the Luons' plight, viewing them solely as a potential threat, an outbreak that could spread beyond Lurix 5, endangering the humans foolish enough to intervene. They branded Holt as reckless, accusing her of jeopardizing the entire region. Captain Holt listened to the transmission before calmly deactivating it. She had no intention of complying with their directive. The Council had already abandoned the Luons once. If humanity represented their last hope, then so be it. As the days progressed, the Luons began to recover, a testament to the humans' intervention. The crew's persistent efforts, administering treatments, reinforcing quarantines, and sharing knowledge, started to yield positive results. The plague had not been eradicated, but its progression had slowed, and some of the Luons were exhibiting signs of improvement. With each small victory, the trust between the two species deepened. The Luons, who had witnessed their larger, more imposing allies abandon them, now looked upon the humans with a sentiment they had not felt in months: hope. The humans offered comfort in ways the Luran people hadn't anticipated. They shared personal anecdotes, listened intently to the Luran accounts of their once magnificent metropolises, and even played melodies to shatter the profound stillness that had enveloped the desolate celestial body. These humble gestures from humanity, simple acts of generosity, restored a semblance of normalcy to a population that had lost everything. The Council's threats continued to cast a long shadow, with another warning arriving this time, detailing more severe consequences: exclusion from vital trade pathways, the severance of diplomatic relations, and even the ominous prospect of military engagement. The message was unequivocally clear. Humans had no standing to dispute the edicts of the Galactic Council. However, Captain Holt was unconcerned with political machinations. Her crew stood resolutely behind her, prepared to face any repercussions. The Luran were not merely a species teetering on the precipice of oblivion. They were sentient beings deserving of preservation, irrespective of bureaucratic pronouncements. While the Council perceived the situation as an issue best left unaddressed, humanity saw nascent life, potential, and an opportunity to demonstrate that empathy held greater value than expediency. They recognized a civilization that could be salvaged, and even if the Council chose to condemn them for it, Holt and her team were resolute in their decision not to retreat. With each passing day, the Luran began to reconstruct their fractured community. There was no pretense that the challenges ahead would be easy, but for the first time since the devastating plague had ravaged them, a future worth striving for had emerged, all because humankind had chosen to intervene when all others had abstained. By the time another dispatch from the Galactic Council arrived, once again demanding that the humans cease their interference, Captain Holt simply disregarded it. She had made her commitment. The destiny of the Luran had become inextricably linked with their own, and she had no intention of allowing a bureaucratic decree to alter that course. As the humans continued to assist the Luran in their recovery, a new peril began to manifest in the far reaches of the cosmos. Deep space sensors detected faint, unfamiliar signals, aberrant frequencies, and energy signatures that belonged to no known civilization. Initially, these signals were dismissed as mere interference, or perhaps the lingering echoes of ancient probes adrift in the void. However, as the transmissions intensified and became more organized, Captain Holt and her crew came to the stark realization that they were confronting a far graver situation. The Zarek arrived without preamble, an enigmatic and highly advanced alien species. The Zarek had been observing from the periphery of the galaxy, awaiting an opportune moment to act. Their technological capabilities far exceeded those of most recognized species, and their starships, sleek and deadly, epitomized their prowess. The Zarek were opportunists, exploiting the galaxy's weakened state. They viewed the Luran extinction as a prime opportunity to fill a power vacuum, and Lurix 5, now vulnerable and isolated, presented an accessible target. It was the humans who first detected their approach, having meticulously monitored the situation since their arrival on Lurix 5, remaining ever vigilant. As the Zarek vessels drew closer, it became evident that the plague-ravaged world was on the verge of becoming a war-torn arena. With the Galactic Alliance maintaining its disinterest, the responsibility for defending the Luran fell entirely upon the humans. However, the Luran were not as defenseless as they appeared. For generations, their brilliance had been concentrated in the fields of science and technology. Although they lacked the physical prowess or martial might of other races, they had accumulated a wealth of knowledge, data pertaining to ancient extraterrestrial technologies, forgotten galactic histories, and untapped energy sources. This knowledge had largely been overlooked by the Alliance, deemed inconsequential in times of peace. But now, with the Zarek advancing, it became an invaluable lifeline. As the humans and Luran conferred about the impending threat, the Luran elders disclosed something unexpected. Concealed within their archives lay data concerning the Zarek, a species once thought to be mythical, alluded to only in obscure historical texts. The Luran possessed records detailing ancient Zarek technology, schematics for archaic devices, and strategic insights passed down through centuries of scientific inquiry. This information had never been considered significant until this critical juncture. Captain Holt understood that this knowledge could be the decisive factor in altering the course of events. The Luran, despite their diminutive stature and inherent fragility, possessed a treasure trove of forgotten wisdom that could equip humanity with a fighting chance against the Zarek. What had previously been dismissed as mere scholarly minutiae was now the bedrock of their defensive strategy. The humans, working in close collaboration with the Luran, began to integrate their technological expertise into a unified endeavor. Together, they engineered novel weaponry and defensive systems, blending human resourcefulness with Luran ingenuity. The bond between the two species deepened, extending beyond mere survival to a shared sense of purpose. The Luran, who had once been left to their fate, now played an indispensable role in humanity's efforts to repel the Zarek. Yet, technology alone would not suffice. Holt recognized that the Luran needed the capacity to defend themselves. The humans commenced training the Luran, imparting knowledge of guerrilla warfare tactics and fundamental combat techniques. While the Luran were not physically engineered for conflict, their diminutive size and agility rendered them exceptional scouts and saboteurs. They learned to leverage their speed and stealth to their advantage, setting ambushes and outmaneuvering the considerably larger and more formidable Zarek forces. It was not an effortless transition. The Luran had never engaged in warfare before, and the concept of combat was alien to them. They were a species of intellect, not warriors, But desperation fosters adaptation. Under the tutelage of the humans, they began to discover strength within their limited numbers. They learned to rely on cunning rather than brute force, utilizing their intimate familiarity with Lurix V's terrain to gain a strategic advantage. As preparations were finalized, the Galactic Council remained conspicuously silent despite the escalating threat. They refused to acknowledge the Zarek invasion, viewing it as another remote issue, sufficiently distant from their core territories to warrant no intervention. Once again, the Luran, and now the humans, were left to confront the crisis independently. Captain Holt and her crew understood they were on their own, with no expectation of reinforcements or diplomatic resolutions. The Galactic Alliance had turned its back on them, just as it had on the Luran. However, this did not deter them. Humanity had faced insurmountable odds before, and would do so again. The Zarek were merely another adversary, one that would soon learn that humanity did not abandon its allies. The initial engagement between the Zarek and the combined human-Luran alliance was unavoidable. The Zarek vessels descended upon Lurix V, anticipating minimal resistance from a world ravaged by plague. However, they were met with a force far more formidable than they had anticipated. Luran engineers, working in concert with the humans, had fortified the planet's existing infrastructure with improvised defenses, mines, energy barriers, and sensor jammers that disrupted the Zarek's advanced technology. Small and agile Luran teams infiltrated the Zarek landing parties, sabotaging their equipment and severing supply lines. What the Zarek had envisioned as a swift conquest devolved into a protracted war of attrition. The Luran, once overlooked and abandoned, proved their mettle in the crucible of battle. Their knowledge, previously dismissed as mere academic pursuit, became the very element that provided them and the humans with a crucial edge. The humans, for their part, supplied the decisive force and leadership that the Luran had lacked, transforming their intellectual prowess into tangible battlefield outcomes. Together, they managed to repel the Zarek in the first major confrontation, a result that surprised even Captain Holt. The Luran demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resilience, transforming from a helpless species into a pivotal player in the defense of their homeworld. While the victory was not conclusive and the Zarek threat persisted, it marked a significant turning point. The Luran were no longer vulnerable victims awaiting rescue. With the humans by their side, they had evolved into something more, an alliance determined not to be disregarded, a force prepared to fight for its rightful place in the galaxy. The sky above Lurix V was a dull orange as the Zarek fleet emerged from hyperspace, their vessels casting ominous shadows across the horizon, a menacing force poised to obliterate what remained of the planet and its inhabitants. This time, there would be no preliminary probes, no tentative testing of defenses. The Zarek had arrived with the explicit intention of total annihilation. Captain Arya Holt stood among her crew, observing the ominous spectacle from the command center. She was acutely aware of their numerical inferiority. Their combined human and Luran forces constituted a fraction of the Zarek armada. Yet, Holt was not one to falter. The humans and Luran had fought too valiantly, endured too much to capitulate now. The preparations for this final stand had been meticulously executed. Human engineers had collaborated closely with Luran scientists, fortifying the planet's defenses and enhancing their weaponry. The Luran had infiltrated the galactic network, extracting every available piece of intelligence on the Zarek and applying their collective genius to exploit vulnerabilities in their technology. The Alliance had devised an intricate network of traps, shields, and guerrilla tactics, recognizing that brute force would not prevail, but strategic acumen might. As the Zarek ships descended, obscuring the sky, the Luran worked tirelessly from their subterranean command center. They were not warriors, but their intellect had become a formidable weapon. While the humans engaged in ground combat, the Luran infiltrated the Zarek systems, disrupting their communications and sabotaging their vessels. They employed sophisticated algorithms to scramble targeting arrays, causing Zarek cannons to inadvertently strike their own forces. This represented a new paradigm of warfare, fought as much with data as with outright firepower. The initial wave of Zarek ground troops landed, heavily armored and equipped with advanced weaponry. The humans met them head-on, fighting with sheer grit and unwavering determination. Captain Holt led from the vanguard, directing squads and bolstering troop morale. The engagement was brutal, with explosions illuminating the landscape and both sides sustaining heavy losses. However, the humans were not fighting alone. For the first time, the Luran were actively participating, utilizing their diminutive size and agility to outmaneuver the larger Xeric adversaries. Armed with lightweight plasma pistols and cloaking devices, they became spectral figures on the battlefield, darting in and out of the shadows to disable enemy machinery or deploy explosives. Their contribution was indispensable, and it became abundantly clear that without the Luran, the human defense would have collapsed long ago. Amidst the unfolding chaos, several human soldiers made extraordinary sacrifices. Lieutenant Dave, one of Holt's most trusted officers, single-handedly neutralized a Xeric command ship by piloting a commandeered shuttle directly into its reactor core. His final transmission, a calm farewell, echoed through the comms as the explosion obliterated the vessel. Another squad of human soldiers, despite being outflanked and outnumbered, held their ground for hours, granting Luran engineers the critical time needed to activate a planetary shield capable of repelling the Xeric bombardment. Their courage, their willingness to undertake extreme measures for their allies, served as a profound testament to the resilience and compassion that had defined humanity's role in this conflict. As the battle raged, it became evident that the Xeric had profoundly underestimated their adversaries. What they had dismissed as a dying world inhabited by a fragile species and a band of meddlesome humans had transformed into their most formidable nightmare. The Luran, once perceived as helpless, had become the linchpin of victory. Their sabotage efforts had crippled the Xeric fleet, turning their own advanced technology against them. Simultaneously, the humans' relentless ground defense repelled wave after wave of attackers. In a final, desperate maneuver, the Xeric deployed their flagship into the planet's atmosphere, intending to annihilate the surface in a single catastrophic strike. However, by that point, the Luran had already infiltrated the ship's core systems. As the colossal vessel descended, its engines faltered and failed, sending it spiraling uncontrollably. The humans watched in awe as the Xeric flagship plummeted to the planet's surface, the resulting explosion shaking the ground but leaving the defenders intact. The battle was concluded. Against all expectations, the human-Luran alliance had emerged victorious. As the smoke cleared, Captain Holt stood among the surviving soldiers and Luran, surveying the aftermath. The cost had been immense, with far too many valiant individuals lost, but they had accomplished the impossible. They had confronted an enemy far more powerful than themselves and emerged triumphant. Humanity had once again demonstrated that compassion, courage, and defiance could indeed alter the course of history, and the Luran had redeemed themselves, proving that their intellect and skills were not merely valuable but essential for the galaxy's continued existence. News of the victory disseminated rapidly. The Galactic Council, which had previously dismissed the Luran's plight and condemned the humans for their intervention, could no longer ignore the unfolding events. The defeat of the Xeric had not only saved Lurix 5, but had also thwarted a potentially galaxy-wide invasion. The Council, now facing pressure from other species, was compelled to acknowledge the significance of both the humans and the Luran. There were no grand apologies, no formal declarations of culpability from the Council, but the shift in their disposition was palpable. The Luran, once considered expendable, were now regarded as a species deserving of respect. The humans, once labeled reckless for their defiance of galactic law, were hailed as heroes. The Galactic Alliance had been preserved, not by the formidable fleets of its most powerful constituents, but by the empathy of a few intrepid explorers and the indomitable spirit of a once-forgotten civilization. In the days that followed, the Luran commenced the arduous process of societal reconstruction, with human assistance. They restored their cities and infrastructure, forging a new future for themselves. Their alliance with humanity had transcended a mere partnership of necessity. It had solidified into a bond of friendship and mutual respect that would endure for generations. As Captain Holt and her crew prepared to depart Lurix 5, the Luran elders convened to express their profound gratitude. They had been saved not by the Galactic Council, but by a species that recognized their inherent worth when all others had failed to do so. The Luran, once on the brink of extinction, now stood as a testament to the power of resilience and unity. The humans, true to their nature, simply nodded and began preparations for their next expedition. They had done what they always did, defied the odds, fought for what was right, and, in the process, irrevocably altered the galaxy's destiny.